Chapter 2, Global Aging and Older Immigrants in the United States. Again, a reminder that to find all of the information about this chapter, you'll want to read the textbook. It has some facts and information that won't be covered in the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint is just covering what I think are kind of the highlights and most important aspects of the chapter. So you'll want to make sure you check out the chapter to get all the information for the test. The learning objectives for this entire chapter include identifying global trends in aging, analyzing the economic implications of rapidly aging industrialized countries, assessing the effects on a country's workforce due to the older population, describing how elders in different countries are affected by immigration patterns, and recognizing immigration patterns in the United States and their challenges. So aging is happening all over the world. All over, countries are seeing an increase in life expectancy and a growing older population. The U.S. is not even in the lead when it comes to life expectancy. There are many countries that have a longer life expectancy. For example, Japan, almost 84 years old. Same with Singapore. Compare that to the United States at only 78 and a half years old for life expectancy. So basically, aging is a global phenomenon. And the term population aging, or global aging, is the phenomenon of older adults, of the population of older adults, growing both in raw numbers and in proportion to the larger population. And this is occurring from both an increase in birth rates in developing countries and simultaneously a decrease in death rates in industrialized countries. There are about 810 million people aged 60 plus in the world. By 2040, it is estimated that 14% of the world population will be 65 plus years old. And each year, nearly 58 million people turn 60 around the world. That's 2 per second. And just as we saw in Chapter 1, these are population pyramids. Other countries are seeing a shift in the shape of their pyramids to more of this rectangular shape as well. So this is an example of the population in China, which you'll see in the year 2000 was more of the pyramid shape. But as we project out to 2050, you'll see it's becoming more of that rectangle with more and more people living in the older adult categories than younger. So what does it mean to be old around the world? Well, we talked about some of the categories the U.S. uses to define being old, oldest old, or centenarian, but what do we see in other countries or as kind of an international standard? Well, there is no set international standard for old. Many times the age is tied to when they qualify in that country for pension or retirement benefits from the government. However, the United Nations defines kind of our old category as 60. In the U.S., we typically see 60 to 65 being the start of old because of our pension and retirement system. But many developing countries, you're actually considered old at 50 because if they're living in poverty, they are physiologically, biologically older at age 50, and because there's more unreliable birth records. So it's harder to kind of determine aging. Thinking about the economic implications, there is a lot of information about this in your textbook. Again, very specifically looking at some examples from different countries. So definitely read that section to kind of understand the economics and workforce implications of aging across a variety of different countries. I don't really expect you to have memorized what's happening in these other countries. It's more to just have a better understanding of how it differs. So feel free to check the textbook for some more specific examples, but you won't be quizzed on what is Japan doing or what is France doing with their workforce. So these are kind of just some overall thoughts. Gerontologists, so people that study aging, are interested in studying some of these more rapidly aging countries like Japan, where we see, kind of similar to the US, this large group of older adults living longer and longer. And they want to do this because aging doesn't look the same across all countries. There's a lot of variations going on in a lot of different ways in terms of policies, government, social issues that the countries are handling the aging population differently. So just trying to look at how do all these different countries handle the increase in older adults. And again, you want to check your textbook for some more specific examples of what is happening in terms of pensions, retirement, incentives to keep people working longer. They're working to ensure that there's a balance between continuing to keep older workers in the field working as long as they can, either in any type of workforce area. It could be an office job, more of a factory job, trying to see what they can do to keep older workers in those jobs longer so that they can have more income to support themselves in retirement, but also making room for the younger workers that are coming into the field as well. But when too many older adults retire early and earlier, then the younger workers are needed in the workforce to really fund that Social Security for them and support this large group of older adults as they're living longer in retirement. So it's really tricky balance between those two things. So you can read more about that in the textbook. What I find interesting is thinking about different theories regarding, especially social theories, regarding how we engage with our older adults. So one I'm going to talk about is this idea of modernization theory. So first, what's important to note is that traditional societies really view older adults as having a lot of skills and knowledge. Older adults in these traditional societies have a lot of security. They hold civil and political power because of their skills and knowledge. They provide helpful services to their society by providing wisdom, providing childcare, just providing structure, and they're honored and respected. However, just some examples of that. Older adults have really what we consider a higher status in these traditional societies. So for example, Asian cultures believe in filial piety, which is the idea that individuals should be respected and cared for. Older adults should be respected and cared for. And, it's an honor to serve your older adults. And also in Hawaiian culture, there's a term that's kapuna, which translates to respected elder. There's many examples of traditional societies and how they honor and respect elders. However, there's this theory of what we call modernization theory. And this is when we see a transformation of society from a relatively rural way of life toward urban life. And all parts of the world are increasingly urbanizing. 50% of the world lives in urban areas. So this modernization is happening everywhere. So what's kind of happening in modernization to transform society and change the way older adults are viewed? Well, young people move from the rural areas to cities to seek what they see as better opportunities, while the older adults remain in the rural areas. This residential segregation of young from old, or basically the separation of families, leads to an impact on the family interactions. As you can imagine, there's physical proximity that's been disrupted. They're no longer near each other physically, and that can create a social distance, the reduced status for the older adults, and disruption of family support from young to older adults. And so overall, older adults just begin to have a lower social status as modernization occurs. And so this really increases the concern for caring for elderly when they are kind of seeing this reduced status in these areas. However, modernization does not have to mean the end of filial piety for all countries. Some continue to encourage through respect for elders events, residing with older adults in one home, rather than what we often see in our Western U.S. culture of sending older adults to live in nursing homes. Many other countries with traditional values still continue to bring older adults into their home with them to live in older age. And there's even laws that require care for older adults, which I think is really interesting. So for example, this news article says, "Be good to your parents or else," warns county. And so this is 6 behaviors that authorities have deemed unfilial towards parents and can bring about, legal issues for children who are not caring for their older adult parents. So 6 behaviors that might get you in trouble include living in new residence while parents live in old and dangerous ones, extorting parents' pensions or other subsidies related to age, shirking their caregiving responsibilities, and then neglect, verbal abuse, or physical abuse. So they've really laid out what they expect family members to do for older adults in this instance. Now let's think about what we're seeing happening for immigration in the United States, especially taking into consideration immigration of older adults. So what we see here is that we have the red line indicates new arrivals to the U.S. under age 30, while the green line indicates arrivals age 30 and over. So we see that the rate of those under 30 is decreasing over time, and the new arrivals to our country, age 30 and over, is increasing. So we're seeing more and more adults, and eventually older adults, coming to the United States. And the U.S. population continues to grow with foreign-born residents. 12% of the population, 65 plus, are actually immigrants to the U.S. And this group has grown from 2.7 million to 4.3 million in recent years. So we're seeing a lot of older adults that are immigrants in the U.S. California is one of the top states for older adult immigrants. And as you may know if you pay attention to politics, immigration is currently a very controversial topic in the U.S., with many laws being passed to try to reduce it. But we see lots of programs and groups working to try to help older adult immigrants. For example, I found this news article, Club helps older Korean immigrants find their political voice. So really working with these populations to think about how they can become an active member in the politics in the country. So dilemmas facing older immigrants. 75% of recent older immigrants do not speak English And so this can lead to depression and social isolation if they're unable to communicate very well with people other than the immediate family. They may experience grief and loss over leaving their home country. Financial self-sufficiency is difficult. They face twice the rate of U.S.-born citizen poverty because it's difficult to make money, hold a job when you might have some disparities with your language barriers and maybe access to employment because of issues in our country and perspectives in our country. And then lack of health insurance when it's needed most. When you're an older adult is when you need health insurance the most. You're experiencing the highest rate of, often the highest rate of health conditions and medications needed, and facing often multiple chronic illnesses. But because of the lack of access to health care because of employment, you might not be able to get the care you need. And just a general feeling of dependence on younger family members that you are maybe moving here to be with. And so there's this process of what they call biculturalism, and this is integrating two cultures into one's lifestyle. In coming to the U.S., this often means a loss of this filial piety, so this honor and respect that you might be used to in your traditional society, but in the U.S. is not as prevalent. So it may be difficult for some older adult immigrants to accept this change in their status. But luckily what we do see is that many of these immigrants to the U.S. are still not being put into retirement homes, but rather living with their family members. So they're getting to maintain some of the culture that is comfortable to them and living with their family members. So that's kind of the process of biculturalism, but it can still be a very difficult process. Okay, so again, read the summary section of Chapter 2 in your textbook because there's a lot of information here. Population aging is a global phenomenon that is occurring at different rates around the world. Population pyramids are becoming more rectangular due to various factors that are allowing older adults to live longer. This can impact employment and social issues. Modernization is changing traditional society values around aging. And immigration of older adults to the U.S. is growing and part of a lot larger political conversation in our country.